What frustrates you when other people aren't listening to you, Susan?
They don't get the full picture. They don't have a clear understanding of what I am saying or presenting because their mind's too busy thinking about something else, and they're not getting the full content or the richness of what it is that I'm trying to portray.
Deep listening, impact beyond words. I'm Oscar Trimboli, and this is the Apple Award-winning podcast, Deep Listening, designed to move you from an unconscious and distracted listener to a deep and impactful listener. Did you know you spend 55% of your day listening, yet only 2% of us have had any training in how to listen? Frustration, misunderstanding, wasted time and opportunity, along with creating poor relationships, are just some of the costs of not listening. Each episode of the series is designed to provide you with practical, actionable, and impactful tips to move you through the 5 levels of listening. I invite you to visit oscartrimboli.com/Facebook to learn more about the 5 levels of listening and how to learn from others who are listening better. Joining me is our co-host, Nell Norman-Knott, who will ask the questions that you've been asking and asking me the questions I haven't considered to help make you a deep and impactful listener. In this episode of Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words, we hear from you, the 1,410 people who took the time to participate in the deep listening research recently. So I'm really grateful that you took the time and the energy and your focus to provide the feedback. And what we want to tell you is we've heard you, we're listening, and we're acting on what you told us. As a result of this survey feedback, we've adjusted the design of the podcast, the playing cards, the training, our keynotes, our upcoming 3 online training courses, the next couple of books in the Deep Listening series, and the newsletter. Thanks to you for taking the time to respond to the research. We've heard you and we're listening. You're probably wondering what was it that we decided to change. The research that was distilled by Heidi Martin, we've taken a lot more time to expand level 1 and level 2, and we hope this will help you notice which listening villain you are much faster. So you're going to hear a third voice, and that's Heidi Martin. So big thank you to Heidi and the team at Audience Instinct, her organisation. She's a brilliant researcher. She's incredible at crunching the numbers, and she helped us listen not just to what you say, but what you meant. Heidi's a great role model for level 4 listening for the unsaid, as well as level 5, listening for meaning. And she showed me that throughout the whole project, right up front in the briefing process, but all the way through the research itself, and right up to now where we interview Heidi as well. Heidi listened deeply to what I was asking, whilst asking the questions that I should have asked that I didn't during the briefing process. Heidi's mind is like a metal detector, noticing patterns and separating the random dirt from the insightful gold. What I loved about the interview with Heidi and Nell is Heidi challenged me to think even more deeply about level 1 listening, challenging me to think about level 0 maybe, and the absent listener. Listen out for that part of the research where she talks about what's involved in getting present before the conversation starts. Equally, Heidi's pretty funny, and she's got a great story about muffins in a cafeteria and how the organisation made a miraculous change just simply by paying attention to the taste of the muffins as well as their price. Listen carefully as she talks about the role of her own focus and distraction while she's hanging off the edge of a cliff in Greece, being held there by a rope. Let's listen to Heidi.
I'm super excited that we've got Heidi Martin with us today. Heidi and I worked together 7 years ago at Yahoo 7, and I was so impressed by her because Back then, we were working on some data for a client, and we had this whole collection of really abstract numbers. And to be honest, I looked at it and was a little bit confused. And that's where Heidi came in, and she really helped distill that information and turn it into this fantastic, insightful story, which we could then feed back to the client to give them some really valuable and useful information. So Heidi came to work with Oscar and I on some research which we conducted with 1,400 people about their listening skills. And I was so excited when Heidi put her hand up and said, look, I'm happy to come and work with you on this. So she's here today to talk a bit more about that research, about the insights that we've pulled out. So welcome, Heidi.
Oh, thank you, Nell. Happy to be here.
So you're a facilitator and a researcher.
I grew up in the research kind of industry, and when I went out on my own about 4 or 5 years ago, you really start to realise that people have a hell of a lot of data. You know, that you often come and give us a strategy or give us a piece of research, but at the end of the day, you know, a bit of more and more research that people do nothing with is it's a brilliant waste of money. And so over the last few years, I really have developed from being, rather than just providing those insights, to really helping an organisation take those insights and do something about them. And for me, that's why I was super excited to jump on board with this bit of research, because, you know, market research is kind of listening, but when you can do something about it and you show that back to your audience, your customers, your visitors, that's what actually makes them feel heard. And that's what actually makes the organisation successful. So I think it's a really brilliant kind of objective, improving listening.
Nell, with my work with the Marketing Academy in Australia, whether that's chief marketing officers or agency leads, the biggest frustration they always talk about is market research that's never used. They call it the doorstop. You know, hundreds and hundreds of pages when it's printed out and it's never actioned. And whether it's a customer, somebody visiting your hotel, somebody coming to your petrol station, if you actually take action on what you're being asked to hear, it really transforms the brand's relationship and the engagement there, which ironically is one of the reasons why we're doing the research, to make sure that what we're creating on the Deep Listening podcast is about what our audience is telling us. So we talk about role modeling listening while we're doing the interviews, but we're also role modeling listening by doing this research. And it's a big investment, but it's the right investment for our audience and for those that are the 100 million deep listeners in the world that we seek to serve over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Heidi, you work with corporates and media organisations all across Australia. I'm fascinated to know, you know, when we approached you about this project and we were talking about it, like, what was your perspective on listening?
I can see it. I go into places all the time, and you know that the organisation, you know, you talk to, the first thing you do is you talk to all the stakeholders, and I can tell 90% of the answer almost from talking to them and then talking to the customers. But I couldn't kind of figure out, you know, what's that gap in those organisations. And it's so fun doing this listening piece and realising just how big the challenge is to actually truly listen. It's kind of that, it's almost the little missing link, and creating that bit of the insight comes when we actually do that listening piece. This was quite an eye-opener for me about the size of the challenge that we have if we're going to be all better at this.
Can you give us an example of when that happened with a corporate that you were working with?
So a few years ago, I started working with the art gallery, and the cultural organisations it's an industry that is only just starting to get on board with the listen to your visitor kind of thing. And I was on board, we're going to, new leadership, data-driven decision-making, we're going to need a segmentation and audience strategy. Okay. You know, so I'm doing my stakeholder interviews, and you get a sense, you know, everyone, firstly, a natural apprehension. So I'm listening, what's the problem I really need to solve? That's half my job. So there's a natural apprehension that, you're going to tell us what art to put on the walls first. Okay, no, I'm not going to do that. But, you know, every discussion we had, and most of our meetings were in the cafe, there's this running joke about the muffins in the cafe. how bad they were. And then, I started doing a little bit of visitor research. And even if we're not asking about the cafe, suddenly the muffins come up. And it kind of occurred to me that what I needed wasn't to deliver a big strategy first off. It was through listening. It was obvious I needed to deliver a quick win. And I realised the problem I needed to solve was those damn muffins. And if I could change those muffins, I was going to make it better for the visitors. They're going to stay longer. They're going to be happy. And I'm going to show the staff, who are also the visitors of the cafe, win-win. But I'm going to show them that if we just use a little bit of data to validate, something will change. So in their heads, we know the muffins are a problem. This is a perfect analogy of the whole organisation. We know what's wrong, but nothing's going to change because nothing has. Well, I'm going to show you that with a little bit of data to validate what you know, it gives confidence to make a decision. We presented some insights to the cafe operators. I was just hoping to change the muffins. Within 2 months, there were plans on the table. The cafe was closed down, re-renovated and completely reshaped to address 4 fundamental challenges that the research, listening to those customers had told us about. And like that, I had the okay and for the organisation to say, okay, we can make a difference by listening, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. So that's a kind of an example of we can sit there and listen and know they've known there was a challenge with the cafe for years. But we do something about it. We validate it. We give them a way to make a decision about it, take action, and there was measurable improvement. So that's kind of, sometimes it's just about muffins.
Yeah. And Nell, a great example, what we always talk about is stop hearing, start listening. And the difference between hearing and listening is taking action. And as Heidi's just pointed out, it's potent, it's powerful, it's transformational if you actually act on what people are saying.
Can you attest to the muffins being any better?
The muffins were better. I can't say they were cheaper, but the idea is about value, not price. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Take us through this research, Heidi, right from the top. Who we interviewed, what those questions were that we asked people.
A beautifully simple piece of research. We were looking to uncover what those barriers to listening were. 3 really simple, open-ended questions, which yielded very detailed and interesting results. So what do you struggle with as a listener? What do you get frustrated with other people? And what would you like to improve in yourself? And that was done across a representative sample across gender. So we've got the balanced sample of men and women. It was representative across age group, which lets us slice the data by generation. And it was done across location as well. So a very robust sample you guys provided me with the 1,400 potential listeners to understand.
It sounds like there's always an aha moment in that, in the research when you talk about it like that, Heidi. What was the aha moment when you were looking through the data that we gave you, that we collected?
The aha moment for me was, my goodness, this isn't actually about specific listening skills. The challenge starts much, much earlier. The challenge we need to solve is having people mentally available and with the intent to listen, because they're not, and until we resolve that, it doesn't matter what you want to teach people when they're in that room, and it was, you couldn't even ignore the evidence. Something like when we look at the numbers, so we slice the data by your listening villains that you guys talk about, and 80% of the frustrations for people are these lost listeners, right? They're not in the room. You can even see it. One of the better quotes, I can see it when they're not listening and they've drifted off. Like, it's physically obvious. Or when they're on their mobile phone. Flip it on the other side, 70% of people, when we say, what do you struggle with yourself? Attention, focus. We like this one. Letting my own thoughts get in the way and distract me. Being distracted with other work thoughts, quietening my own thoughts so I can retain what's said. We're not even that this person's lucky. They're at least trying. So many more people, they're coming straight with their phone. They're not even ready to listen. So we need to step right back. We're not teaching listening skills specifically. We need to teach people to be present, and really engage in a conversation first.
And that was a really interesting thing that came out of the research. Was we talk about the 5 levels of listening, and actually it does start with you in the room at the beginning, and there's the 4 different listening villains: the lost listener that you talked about, the dramatic listener as well, the shrewd listener, and the interrupting listener. And it sounds like the lost listener is this big one that a lot of people struggle with, but we almost need to revise those listening villains and say there's an absent listener as well. I mean, what do you think about that, Oscar?
Yeah, what was interesting, we kind of posed the question from both perspectives. We asked people, what frustrates you when other people aren't listening to you? And equally, we asked the opposite question. And the fascinating thing in the data, when we asked the opposite question, what do you struggle with when it comes to listening, is it wasn't a mirror reflection, which is the point that Heidi talks about. There's a lack of awareness to the most fundamental question of, are you present? Are you available to the conversation before you start? So I was delighted that the absent listener was kind of discovered, because for a lot of us, we can't even take the time to get ready for the conversation. So I think the elegance in the survey was asking the question from both perspectives and us not getting mirror responses back. What do you struggle with? What frustrates you? Honestly, with 1,400 people in the data tracking, it should be roughly some kind of symmetry there, but there wasn't. And the big gap that Heidi points out is this lack of awareness that you actually have to be ready to listen. And for most people, it's not. I think most people notice it in themselves more than they notice it in others. And that's okay. It's what you do about it next. And that's what the podcast is dedicated to. The other piece that Heidi did a great job of was mapping to levels. And, for me, it was exciting to see 86% of the problem with listening is at level 1 and level 2. And if we want to make a new level, we'll call it level 0. Let's get present. Let's understand how to do that. And this research has informed the next series of interviews. So we've got a lot more people that we're interviewing who are neuroscientists, people who are experts in attention from the Netherlands, people who are experts in memory from Germany, people who are world champion snipers from Sweden, to help people understand what does it mean to be world class when it comes to focus. So that's me saying to you, thank you for listening, but it's also me saying to you, I've listened to the research and we're adjusting what we're doing in the podcast as a result. And I know that would make Heidi a proud muffin moment for her.
This pleases me great.
I was going to say we're changing the muffin mix.
One of the things we speculated in advance was, do men and women listen differently, and do the age groups listen differently? And I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder, but yeah, I'm just channeling the audience right now. I'd be curious to understand what we discovered.
The most interesting thing to me was there aren't massive differences between any of these cuts. You kind of you think that there's some sort of sensational thing we can pull out of here between gender and generations, but that fundamental piece is still there in terms of focus and attention. There are only small differences in terms of, say, the younger generation are a little bit more, they'll say they struggle with the switching off of their phone, for example, or the device itself. But that's the exact same issue as an older generation. They just might have more things on their mind or multitasking. The issue itself is still focus. It's still that level 1, listening to yourself. They're just slightly different distractions, but fundamentally, it's the same overarching principle. The thing that kills me is that people are still in some way aspiring to think that they should be multitaskers. what would you like to improve? My multitasking.
Yeah, I hear my clients talk about their multitasking muscle, and I need to develop my multitasking muscle, and they're trying to explain there's no such thing. And, lucky enough, coming up, Dr. Romy Mushtaq from Florida in the United States, a neuroscientist and a doctor and a practitioner of mindfulness, can not only tell us what the science is, but the neuroscience, why multitasking is a myth. But I think the data is going to tell us that just as clearly.
A big theme that people are noticing is the people in the room on their phone, visibly absent. They're clearly attempting to multitask and doing it poorly.
I think they're failing spectacularly. I don't think they're doing it poorly at all, because again, there isn't an awareness that they believe it's something they need to develop, and it's a complete myth. Whether I talk to productivity experts, neuroscientists, memory experts, mindful practitioners, every single one of them says if there's one thing that everyone can do is just bring your presence to the conversation, be still, and be patient.
I think I mentioned to you guys when I saw it, there's something wrong with the world, right? We're just getting busier and busier, and we think that we have to do more and more things just to keep up. And it's the paradox of the more things we're trying to do, the less we're achieving. And the more, every time you do a bit of research, you kind of get a sense of what's going on, that bit of a read of what's on people's minds. And we have become overly busy. We think that multitasking is the outcome, but clearly from this research and the work that you're doing, we need going slower and being present is so much more effective, so much more effective.
How does this play out for you, Heidi, in your day-to-day life?
I think that idea of being present, funnily after doing this research, a few weeks ago, actually just came back from a trip rock climbing in Greece, few of my favourite things. And the beauty of rock climbing is it's an activity that you simply have to be 100% present for. You don't even have to try. The very nature of it means that you are present, and there is something really powerful about that, and makes me feel like it gives me a very amazing feeling. I think there's also a bit of a parallel when you're climbing. There's two of you too, and so between the belayer and the climber, you are listening to each other.
What does the belayer do?
The belayer holds the rope and makes sure you're safe when you're climbing. So as a belayer, when I've got someone climbing above me, I'm listening if they're going to call out, but more than that, I'm actually focusing on their body language. How are they climbing? Do I feel like they might be falling? Give them enough rope, not too much, etc. So you need to be really attuned in that partnership. And like I said, there's no, you don't have to think about putting the mobile phone away, because you've got, this idea of staying safe and alive to help you. But on the flip side, I was put on a climb a little bit harder. It was a cheeky guide. She was wonderful. She put me on a climb that was a grade that I haven't done for years. And I was up there and I fell off about 3 times. And so in this instance, I stopped being 100%. Well, I was present, but my mind your mind starts racing. And I was sort of remembered, I'm going, I can't do this. And then suddenly I notice my head's going faster, my heart rate's going faster. And for me, it's that sense, and I do it naturally, is to breathe. When you're losing that presence, to come back to the breath, take your time. If you can regulate my breath, then the rest starts to regulate. And I realised I'm safe. I realised that I'm quite capable of getting over this challenge, and I didn't want to give up, and that I had time. And damn, that was awesome, right? And it's exactly the same thing. I use that concept of breathing to help me present in every day-to-day situation. And fundamentally, that's the foundation of good listening, being present. And your mind is going to run. Like my mind goes a million places when I'm interviewing someone or doing a bit of research, but I'm constantly bringing myself back, centering myself, breathing, to give myself the space and to give the person that's speaking the space that they need to get over that, what they're trying to tell me.
But you also lecture at university, and I'm sure you see that when others are listening to you.
At the beginning of this year, we ran a consulting skills workshop with the University of Sydney Business School. And oh my goodness, when people are sitting on laptops to take notes and you're talking to a room of 50 people that are, they might start out taking notes on laptops, but it is just so easy. You can see them one by one following the tab or following the notification and losing that sense of presence. And so, and one of the things we're trying to teach them is you're going to go into a consulting assignment and you need to go there and listen and really take that information away. And to tell that room of folk that are sitting in front of their laptops, I said, I really encourage you to put the computer away and, okay, maybe not a pen and paper, that might be a little too analog, but, a tablet in flight mode with a stylus and really get rid of all of those distractions and truly be present.
One of the things we promise those in the audience is there'll be a trick, a tip or a hack about improving their listening. But I wonder if we might be able to turn the tables. You've been in meetings where you're taking a brief and you can notice the other person's drifting off. Are there any techniques you use to bring them into the present when you notice they're distracted?
Sometimes you're interviewing someone who quite honestly probably does have somewhere better to be, because I'm often, it's a really small window of their time, and I'll often say, do we need to, if they're really caught up on their phone, I'll actually just notice it and just say, hey, is there a better time for us to do this? Because sometimes I haven't scheduled these meetings, so they're provided for me. People are coming in and out, and I'll give them a way out, and then they'll be like, oh, it's easy to say yes if it's the case, but mostly people will say no, come back to the room. But also, do you know what? Often when people drift off, I'm probably not always asking the right question. And so letting making sure you have a discussion guide, but leaving that aside and following the thoughts that they're having, and having more in-tuned questions is really helpful to keep them on track, I think.
And Heidi, in those moments, how do you explore what's unsaid?
You can tell when someone pauses straight away when you've asked a question. It's like, they're being really mindful of what they're saying to me right now. So sometimes I know I can ask that question because I might know them, like, that's a curly one. Is there a bit of politics behind that? Or is there something behind that? Or I might just make a note of myself to figure out what that's about. I'll also be really clear to let them know who else I'm speaking to in the organisation or not, and so that they feel safe parameters.
Heidi, I'm just wondering if you can take us through the high-level insights that came out from the research. And if you're listening along, and you can pause now, just go to oscartrimboli.com/research, and you can look at some of the graphics and the images there along with what Heidi's saying, because that'll give you a little bit more information, a bit more detail.
First and foremost, the lost listener, by far and away the biggest villain, accounting for all of our listening. 80% of frustrations that people had came under the concept of being a lost listener. And flip that on the other side, 70% of people's own struggles were lost listening. I'd really love to go back to something that Oscar said earlier around those two things not necessarily mirroring. What I'd like to say is they're two sides of the same coin, but people reflect on them differently, right? So you see someone, they're wasting my time. They're wasting my time and effort. I'm really struggling because they're so lost. They're wasting my time. They're on the phone. What do I struggle with? Maintaining attention. I'm really busy. I'm multitasking. Don't they know I've got a lot of things to do? I mean, have you seen all the things coming on my phone? They're actually, whilst they're different concepts, they're two sides of the same coin. The biggest way that people express the frustration that they feel is wasted time and effort, right? No one wants to waste their time. I think what was interesting, though, is the spectrum of response to what that means to some people. The impact of not listening can be really quite almost emotional for some people. From, they're wasting my time. Oh, it's a little bit disrespectful. to a minority of people feeling, I feel unimportant, I feel disrespected.
Yeah. One of my favourite, I call them the arrogant listener, is like, these people are too silly to fully appreciate how important what I am.
I love that one.
Saying, and they're not noticing. And the opposite is true too. And there was a bit of a leaning, I wouldn't call it statistically significant in the female gender, where women felt they weren't being heard. They were being ignored in the dialogue.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something we'd see a lot of women probably echo in business, of not being heard. I thought it was really interesting because we ran an event a couple of weeks ago, and one of the executives that I spoke to at that event was talking about interruption and how female executives at a certain level are taught that to get back into the conversation, what they must do is interrupt. And they actually have words that they're trained to use in certain scenarios and to kind of keep interrupting and to get themselves back into the conversation. So there's even techniques out there on how to stop that.
Taking ourselves back into that room at the Hilton in Sydney, Nell, one of the things that's a responsibility of the leader is to curate that environment. And we were very deliberate in having half the room men and half the room women, so that dynamic didn't play out. Even though I had a bit of fun, where there were 6 tables in the room, all split 50-50 men and women, except for 2, where there was 100% men and 100% women, to see if there would be any statistically valid or different outcomes. We'll save that for the next kind of conversation as we deconstruct the deep listening workshop. What else is in the research that matters?
The final headline stat that we probably haven't covered is that, if you talked about it earlier, but let's put a number on it, about 95% of all frustrations, all struggles, they relate to that level 1 and level 2 listening. So,
and maybe let's even say level 0.
And let's say level 0. We've introduced level 0. We're absolutely and level 0 starts before the room too. We keep talking about presence in the room. It starts with time and place as well. How many people do you know? Can I just have a quick word? No, I'm not ready. And being ready in the room. So, I was a little bit floored by just how low down we really are in terms of those listening levels.
Hey guys, I wanted to take a quick pause. And before we get too down on the lost listener or the absent listener, we have some wonderful tools on the right-hand side of the website, oscartrimboli.com. It's a little black and white microphone with a black tab saying, send a voicemail. This is a simple way for you to share your thoughts on the podcast, and you might choose to pose a question also. If you prefer just to use your mobile phone or your cell phone, just use the voice memo feature of your phone and email a recording, a reflection, or a question to podcasts@oscartrimboli.com. Despite the fact we've spent a lot of time in the research discussing the impact of the lost listener and distraction, there are some simple, elegant and productive ways to make progress. You're about to hear from 2 people in completely different situations. They both use the practices from the playing cards, from the book and the podcast at level 1 of deep listening. And they've sent through these recordings to show us how they've improved their listening. We're about to hear from Jason, an in-house recruiter, and Lucy, a newly appointed director for a non-for-profit based in London.
Hi Oscar, this is Jason from Melbourne. I wanted to share with you the impact of applying what I learned recently about the power of listening to yourself first. I had an opportunity to apply it to an interview the day after one of your sessions, and I found my focus on the candidate was more complete than usual. This was done by checking in with myself first, then managing the distractions while being aware of the times when I wasn't 100% on the candidate. This led to me being able to hear patterns in what was being said, which in turn led to better questions, allowing me to pluck out the truth of what was being said.
Hi Oscar, this is Lucy from London. I wanted to share my story of how I came across deeper listening and the impact it's had for me and for my colleagues. And I found the 5 myths of listening, and I read through this before a meeting I had first thing with one of my subordinates. And I'm a fairly new director of a charity, so there's lots for me to still learn. Aware I can go into problem-solving mode quite quickly and get distracted, particularly in longer conversations. And I really wanted to be truly present and to truly listen. Took some of the tips that I'd learned. I decluttered before the conversation, turned my phone off, turned off my computer screen. I didn't read a single email prior to the meeting, so I wasn't in a mind frame of being kind of reactive. I wanted to be totally present. And during the conversation, I have a tendency of kind of chipping in and trying to, problem solve or make someone's life better by presenting my ideas. But instead, I just listened, I asked questions, gave them a chance to explore what they wanted to say and go a bit deeper into what they were trying to say. I tried to pick up on cues of when they may not be finished. So something I'm not good at is long silences. But I played with this and allow some space for silence to just make sure that sentence or that part of that conversation was truly finished before we moved on to the next thing. And to be honest, it's had a really good impact. We had a deep and rich conversation. We came away with clear actions that were both mutually beneficial for both of us. I felt that she was able to reach conclusions for herself, and I got a sense that she felt valued from the conversation and truly listened to. And she's gone away feeling quite encouraged and motivated. So thanks, Oscar.
Imagine being a candidate who's being interviewed by a distracted recruiter. What would be the cost for you, the candidate? What would be the cost for the recruiter? What would be the cost for their organisation? Imagine an organisation that takes all the time to create a position description, to publish it, to put it on the internet, to take applications, and then that moment of truth, when it gets to the interview, the recruiter's completely distracted. They miss some of your answers. They're not paying attention. I know it sounds completely crazy, yet it's the reality for a lot of rushed recruiters out there. Well done, Jason. I'm sure that candidate noticed the difference, whether you hired them or not. And you created a great experience for that candidate, and I'm sure they'll tell others about it. Could you feel what it was like to be on the other side of the discussion with Lucy? Did you notice her stillness and her focus simply in the way she made her recording? Well done, Lucy. I'm sure you've changed the day for that staff member, maybe even more. It sounds like a deeper conversation created a much more productive meeting for you and for them. Level 1 listening is all about listening to yourself, and I'd encourage you to use the tips and the tricks that Jason and Lucy have just applied. Think about how to be in the moment before the moment arrives. How can you notice your distraction before the meeting takes place rather than in the moment where it's really difficult to fix? Well done to both of them for taking the time to become present and still so they can make an impact beyond words. I love hearing from you. I encourage you to share your recorded reflections, whether that's about your frustrations or about the progress that we've just heard. Use the voicemail feature on the website. It's got a little button with a microphone there in the middle right of oscartrimboli.com, or simply email a voice memo from your phone at podcast@oscartrimboli.com. Let's go back to Heidi, Nell and I to explore a little bit further the deep listening research and how you can join the dots with the deep listening playing cards.
I feel like there's a couple of things we've got out of this research. So we've got the absent listener, we've got the level 0. If you were to summarize this research and what it's given us in a simple couple of sentences, what would you say?
You have a very big job to do, but it's a really exciting one because it's going to make a huge impact, because I really like things where small differences can make big impacts. I'm not in the world of trying really hard for small things. It is, if we can give people the tools to be present and intentional, you have unlocked so much more to make a difference for people than anyone who's going to try and teach listening skills, how to run a meeting, etc. Because you need to start at level 0, level 1, and it's going to have a huge impact.
Heidi make an extraordinarily valid point about distraction happens before the conversation takes place. And in episode 54, in that distraction episode, we got a lot of great feedback. And based on the number of people who are going online to get the deep listening cards, it's fantastic. If you visit oscartrimboli.com/cards, as a number of people did in the distraction episode, I want to draw your attention to 5 cards that sit at level 1. And they start off with listen to yourself. And the tip on the card says, clear the space in your own mind before you start to listen to the speaker. And notice your breathing. If there's one thing you could do is simply breathe a little bit more deeply prior to that. And we talk about that on episode 54 around distraction. The next one is self-talk. How many browser windows have you got open in your own mind? And how many do you need to shut down so you're not noticing a whole bunch of different conversations in your head? And it says here, the story in the listener's mind is the self-talk. And what's the story they're making up in their own head while they're waiting for the speaker to finish, even though they're not listening? Back to Heidi's point, the question on the card poses to us, is now the right time to have this conversation? And you'll notice that Heidi mentioned that in one of her consulting assignments where she asked that question to the person who was on the phone. Again, before the conversation even takes place, the next card talks about your surroundings. And it says, distractions destroy your ability to focus on the speaker and yourself during the dialogue. So limit the distractions that take place. And the question it poses, is this the right place to have the conversation? And there's been many examples of, should the conversation be a walking conversation? Should it be in a room that's very quiet? What happens if you're in an open plan office and you're turning to the person next to you to have that discussion? The fourth card in the 5 from level 1 is to start to notice your breathing. How deeply you're breathing will influence how well you're listening. The deeper you breathe, the deeper you listen. So just hold your breath a little bit longer. Try and work your breathing from your nose in and out through your mouth. I can picture Heidi doing that on the Greek island rope climb where she was trying to figure out how to breathe. And I'm sure in that moment when she caught herself, her breathing wasn't about gasping for air in through her mouth and out through her mouth. The reality is it's counterproductive. You actually use more energy that way. And the most natural way to breathe is to start through your nose and then out through your mouth. And finally, are you noticing the breathing of the speaker? Once your breathing is still, notice their breathing. And in slowing down your breathing, and you'll help them to come to a place. Then finally, once you're in the conversation, so you notice all 4 of these cards so far, we haven't even got to the conversation. So at level 1, when we look at the deep listening cards, and I invite you to explore them, the deep listening card talks about focus. And it says, are you noticing all 6 dimensions of listening? Are you hearing? Are you seeing? Are you feeling? Are you present? Are you respectful? And then finally, are you focused? And the question you need to pose here, and the card asks this really elegant question, am I completely present in this discussion? So I'm just so delighted that 1,400 people have validated all the cards and the work we've done in the past. But equally, what's in the research is going to help us with the next version of the cards and augmenting the cards to go deeper, to go richer, and to be more accessible to you. So I think Nell and Heidi, I think the deep listening cards are a really practical place for everybody to go to. And again, if you want a summary of the research, oscartrimboli.com/research, if you want to download all the amazing insights that Heidi's compiled for us. She's created a transformational platform to launch this rocket ship to get to 100 million listeners faster. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. Hi, it's Oscar, and if you're still listening now, you're probably a really loyal deep listener. I'm building an online training program for managers in organisations. So if you're a manager inside an organisation of more than 500 employees, I'd love you to reach out to me. Just send me an email. That's podcast@oscartrimboldi.com, podcast@oscartrimboldi.com. We want to involve you in prototyping this online course, and you'll get lifetime access to this course as one of the prototypers. We're only looking for 5 people to participate in this prototyping exercise, and your input will ensure that what we're building is something that we're listening to and helpful for you. Thanks for listening.